Hi everybody, and welcome to the Net Zero webinar with ATSE. My name is Sally Ann Williams, and I'm absolutely delighted to be your moderator today. As we kick off this session today, and we're gathering across the country from all different places, I'd just like to take this opportunity to first acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we're meeting. Today, I'm on the Gadigal land, so I just want to pay my respects to the elders past and present. And I want to pay respect to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us online today or are watching later on the YouTube channel. As we share and discuss our knowledge and practices, we acknowledge and recognise the deep knowledge forever embedded in custodianship of country. Net zero is a fantastic goal. It's a hot area of conversation. And today I really want to, I'm really excited that we're getting together with this fantastic panel to unpack that a little bit more. I think when we talk about climate change, and at least when I reflect on it, the debate has been raging for decades. It's not new to us, but I think the inaction and the challenges have seemed so real and insurmountable in the past, and it's only sort of been in this decade and kind of the last few years that I feel like there's a groundswell of public engagement and leaning into the opportunity. And net zero emissions are both a challenge, but it is also an opportunity for us. I think we could all agree, or hopefully all agree, that it's an absolute imperative to get there. But one of the things that we need to do in the conversation is talk about the science, but also talk about the opportunity in front of us and some of the things that we maybe need to look at in that transformation, in that journey. Research from Deloitte Access Economics estimates that over 250,000 jobs can be added to Australia's economy by 2070 as a result shifting to a net zero economy. I personally think that's actually a little low. I think there's an incredible amount more than that we can do. But I think it's more than just about jobs for the economy in Australia. It's actually about impact locally and globally. And what are the spillover effects that will come from these new and emerging industries and economies that will benefit not just people and planet, but actually that enduring prosperity and future opportunities and economic opportunities for many people. So today is our chance to unpack that a little bit. We're joined by three fantastic panelists who I'm just going to introduce them very, very briefly now because I want to give the maximum amount of time to them and to the conversation that we're going to have. So today we've got with us Andrew Cole. He's the Managing Director and the CEO for Oz Minerals. He's got over 30 years in experience in exploration and operations in the resource sector, and he's had a huge number of exploration geoscientist roles, lots of experience in mine development and mine operations globally. He was the Chief Operating Officer of Rio Tinto Iron and Titanium in 2013 and was responsible for over more than 5,000 employees across 4 operating sites based out of Montreal. What I really loved about my conversation with Andrew yesterday is that he really values building the mine of the future. And I'm not going to steal his thunder because he says it better than I can possibly do, but he's got a real vision as Managing Director and CEO of Oz Minerals for where they can go and what it looks like to modernise both the business with a culture that empowers its people to do great things and to move forward. So really excited to hear more from him. We've also got Sophia Hamlin Wang. She's the COO of Mineral Carbonation International. If you haven't already looked up what they do, you need to, because I had my mind a little bit blown the other day. So the Cleantech COO, she's a circular economy expert, she's a speaker, she's a university lecturer, she's a diversity advocate, so she's got a long list of things that she's brilliant at. But Mineral Carbonation International, or MCI, is a technology platform that transforms CO2 into building materials and other valuable industrial products. And I think what's really interesting about this technology is it's not just what's now, it's actually really what's next. And there's a whole economy that could be built on top of this. And I'm not going to steal her thunder either, because it's really, really fascinating. But some of the things to just recognize about MCI is that they actually won first place at the Net Zero Challenge Technology Centre COP26 pitch battle in Glasgow. They've been recognised globally for being really innovative and driving the conversation forward. And I think with Sophia's role and her work both inside of the organisation and advocacy, you know, she's got a real opportunity to tie together today for us the technology, but also the how do we get there piece of the story. And last but not least, because she's actually going to be speaking first to us, is Professor Linda Hancock. So she's the director of Hepburn Wind. She's, in addition to that role, she's an honorary personal chair in public policy at Deakin University in Melbourne. And she researches on public policy analysis, applied social policy, regulatory theory and policy, power and regulatory governance of climate change and ethics. And the list goes on and on and on. She's had a lot of work over the years in the ARC sector and research in holding those grants, and most recently as co-chief investigator of the $25 million ARC Centre for Excellence in Electromaterials Science. So I think it's going to be really interesting to hear her perspective from, you know, the roles that she's played as well. So, couple of things for housekeeping, just to let you know about where we're going and where we're headed. We are going to hear from each one of the panelists, and I'm just going to ask them to give, you know, a broad perspective of what they do in their own words for you to hear, and what they're excited about in this space, and just, you know, really share with us from their perspective of what we need to be knowing and what we need to be thinking about in this day. But we're also going to have an opportunity for a Q&A section and in this conversation today. And it is a conversation. So I want to encourage you throughout the session, if you've got a questions, pop it into the Q&A function down below. Vote up, you know, questions that you're interested in. And what I'll try and do is weave those into the conversations, as well as call them out at the end if you've got any sort of specific things that we haven't covered. And, you know, please feel free to go broad, ask for both their perspective in their roles, but, you know, also their personal perspective. We've got experts on the panel today, and, you know, it is that expertise that we want them to share, as well as the vision that they have for the future. So with that, I'm super excited to hand over. Linda, would you kick us off and share with us, you know, a little bit about your experience, the work that you're doing at Hepburn Wind? And, you know, I know there's a wealth there to unpack. I'm almost too afraid to ask that opening question, but let me give the floor to you and let you kick us off with everything that we need to know about your work.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and also I'd like to pay my respects to the Jaja Wurrung and their elders past, present and emerging. They are the owners of the land upon which Hepburn Wind is located. And thank you for inviting me to this very important topic webinar, and for the work that the Academy is doing. Part of the work that I've been doing in research has been around the risks, which we've known about, the risks of climate change for over 20 years. And we now find ourselves at this very sharp precipice, at a tipping point. And it's not just about temperatures, it's about disasters and their increasing frequency and seriousness. I was actually located at the Northern Rivers during the last floods, and with two major floods in around the Byron and Mullumbimby areas, and then going down into Ballina and Lismore twice in the same month, raising issues of insurance, housing, homelessness, economic decline and impact. We have our own climate refugees within our own country. So what are we doing about it in terms of net zero and our reliance on coal? And I guess I'll say just a brief word about the research I've been involved in 5 years on the ARC-funded Electromaterials Centre, because I've been on the policy. You might say, what's a political scientist doing on a project like that? Well, it's multidisciplinary, and this is not just about technical transitions, but it's about the socio-technical. It's about engaging populations and, moreover, communities in this transition, because without that engagement, we're not going to make it. And it's so complex, it's so multifaceted, that it's not just about inventing devices, it's about changes in behaviour as well. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, for example, in energy use with just behaviour change, but then that gets you into complex areas of changing attitudes that are the basic building block of behaviours. And so, speaking about behaviour, we've had an intransigent policy environment for decades now in Australia, favouring coal, oil and gas. It's been more about electricity, but it's also about energy and hard to move sectors like transport. So part of what our project has been looking at is green hydrogen and the way that you can harness wind and solar for the production of hydrogen. And again, it's about these socio-technical transitions of the membrane that you might be able to put ammonia and hydrogen in and out of those two forms. So we've been looking at supply chains and community empowerment. And so when I came on the board of Hepburn Wind about 5 years ago, it's been such an amazing experience because this was the first wind farm in Australia. It's located 100 kilometres northwest of Melbourne. Most people know Dalesford and Hepburn Springs, big tourism area, and it's located at Leonards Hill. So we have two turbines giving 4.1 megawatt power by wind. They're called Gale and Gusto. They are huge and they are generating energy. So Hepburn Wind was established in 2007, but it became operational in 2011. And during that 4 years, there was a deep engagement with community and there are over 10,000 members, and their members, neighbours and community have funded this wind farm, but it's a cooperative embedded in community and with links into local government and the broader community as users of electricity. And what Hepburn Wind is basically about is new pathways for community development. And we need to kind of maybe think about what is community and how does community power and energy differ from the commercial. Firstly, it's about governance with community democracy principles being at the basis. It's about co-design. During that 4 years, the executive and the directors worked very extensively with the community to get members on board and to get the social licence to operate. You know, you've heard controversies about noise from wind farms and so on, but we have very good relationships with our neighbours. And so it's about having diverse products and building community resilience. That's part of our ethos at Hepburn Energy. Just been renamed, rebadged Hepburn Energy. We've been going for 10 years and we've paid one dividend to members. We've had a number of trips along the road though. I want to mention them, particularly recently. Since 2018, partly in response to the bushfire Royal Commission, all generators had to upgrade their infrastructure. That's been a very time-consuming and costly exercise. Unfortunately, as community energy, we were able to get some rebates from the state government. I might add we've had a number of grants from the state government because it's mainly state governments rather than the federal government that's leading on community energy and on renewables. And so we've had to upgrade our rapid earth fault current limiter. And in fact, last year that resulted in the power core testing, which took a long time, resulted in a 41% reduction in our revenue. So it's not all plain sailing. Also, we had a business model in the beginning, and that's worth mentioning because it was based on a payback system based around a price of around $100 per unit for renewable energy certificates. Now, since then, and at times we've got as little as $25. It's hovering now around 35 to 38, sometimes a bit more. Now, small operators get really marginalised in this process, and we've come to a point of almost insolvency. So we've had to think laterally. And we're putting in 5 megawatts of solar currently in the planning process. And that's very important because that way we're going to have 2 forms of energy generation, but also we're moving into retailing. So we're becoming not only, we are a generator, but becoming a retailer in a partnership with Flow Power as a back-end partner. That's happening right now. And so we're trying to save the wind farm by diversifying. And this new power generation is going to give us the capacity to grow things behind the meter, to have perhaps hydroponic industry, to diversify a region of Victoria where most of the jobs growth has been in hospitality and tourism. We want to be able to lead the net zero challenge of providing new jobs. We're going to also be using PEG technology with Morali as the installer. This technology uses less area for the installation of solar panels, and we're also using the less arid land on our leased property at Leonards Hill. So it's a permit for 7.44 kilowatt hours of megawatt hours of solar using this PEG technology. And so this is a very important move for us and puts us back in the black, hopefully, and able to support the net zero. We've also got a very powerful partnership with Hepburn Shire, part of our community remit, to help them get to net zero undertaking by 2025. And yesterday, we met historically on the land there as directors of the board with Chris Bowen, who is the Shadow Minister for Energy, and he announced that Hepburn Energy will receive a community battery if Labor are elected. I don't want to make this overtly political, but so far, the main point is that we've mainly been getting some traction around the country for community energy with state governments, and some in particular, South Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, but not with the federal government. And so this is very important because by committing to 400 community batteries across Australia, each one with the capacity to engage and empower 250 households, including renters who can't afford solar. So these are part of our remit. I probably better wind up. And we've got future plans, as I mentioned, for agriculture. We engage with schools. We've given over 60 grants in our 11 years, totalling over $110,000, and we've put solar on a lot of community buildings. So I guess I would like to leave my overview with reinforcing the importance of the community in energy and community energy as a particular sector that often needs some special, I wouldn't say assistance, but recognition for the work that we do engaging and in the important socio-technical side of transitions to get to net zero. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Linda. That was incredibly a comprehensive overview. And I also loved that in that narrative and in that story, you've actually taken us on a journey from inception in 2007, operational in 2011, through to today. So there's actually quite a long history. And I think sometimes in the conversation, we do kind of come to this with it's a now and it's really recent, but actually there's a real longevity and a history and a legacy there to learn from. And I know we're going to come back to that and unpack it, because there's a few things that you said there that I think are really important for us all to come back to around community engagement and collaboration, co-creation. And I love the socio-technical transition phrase. I'm totally going to use that one because I think that's actually a really important narrative. Andrew, I want to bring you into this conversation right now to talk about the work that you're doing, because Linda's work is, quite extensive in a new energy thing. There'll be some people sitting out there going, oh, okay, Oz Minerals, mining, why are you thinking about this? Why are you here? But controversially, it's actually not controversial at all. We can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a lot that we need to do from minerals and mining, but we definitely know that there's a new way to do it. So can you sort of walk us through some of that sort of transition, the way that you're thinking? I know you have quite a different approach with the work that you're doing at Oz Minerals, and in the conversation we had the other day, it was quite interesting, I think, to just bust open maybe some of the biases that people that are watching this may have about minerals and mining, right? We kind of have a perspective that we're taking on board, but actually your approach and your conversation that you were thinking about was fascinating to me. And I think there's an incredible amount we can learn from that.
Yeah, for sure. Happy. Look, I'm really pleased to be here today, Sally. So thank you very much for the introduction and fascinating insights, Linda, from your journey. I'm going to start a bit higher level, I think, and just talk a bit about who we are and our company strategy and what we're about. And then I'm going to get into some tangible details. So we're an ASX listed company. We explore for, mine and process copper. And one of the reasons I joined this company is because it's focused on copper. And copper is such an important ingredient for us in so many ways, but certainly including the ability to actually decarbonize the planet is one of the primary ingredients we actually need in order to build wind turbines, electric motors, transmission grids, etc. So it's one of the areas that actually motivated me to be part of this company. I want to take a step back though. We put a new company strategy in place in 2015. So we've been working on this now for nearly 8 years. We have put a purpose in place, and we've been very specific and clear that we are and want to be a for-purpose organisation. Our purpose is about going beyond what's possible to make lives better. And it's purposely drafted in a way that really pushes people to think beyond the way they normally think about things and make people uncomfortable about that experience. But the purpose of doing that is to improve the livelihoods of people. At the end of the day, we're just a collection of people, and everything we do should be about improving quality of life. So that's very much about how we've framed the company. As Sally introduced, we are working to build a modern mining company. Mining has got a very long history. It's got some fantastic legacies, and it's also got some dark legacies. And there are opportunities to rethink the way we extract critical minerals that we need for the future of our planet. So many of the things that we are doing is trying to reimagine that, if you like, and rethink how do we actually go about doing this. One of the very important things I think we've actually done is redefine value. So traditionally for an ASX listed company, people would tell you that we are here to create value for our shareholders. And that is the sole purpose of being. And everything else that we do is a hurdle or a condition in order to meet that outcome. We've actually redefined that. So we have now said that we are here to create value for our stakeholders. And we define 5 stakeholder groups: shareholders, communities, government, suppliers, and our workforce. And they are now systematized right through the company. So every time somebody makes a decision, they must think about the value they are creating, or not, if that's the case may be, for each and every stakeholder group. And that really does refocus the conversation and turns it away from just dollars and cents for the shareholder to a multi sort of stakeholder group. So that's been quite critical for us. The other thing that we did a number of years ago was actually set aspirations in the company. So who do we want to be? So just to give you a few examples, we've said, and we still say, we want to be a virtual organisation where every person can work remotely. We want every person to be able to work flexibly so they can plan work around life rather than life around work, which is traditionally the way industry has sort of formed. We want to be data enabled so people can use judgment and create insights, not doing repetitive type tasks and activities. We want to be agile. So we've done away with waterfall methodology and we use risk and value in decision making. Generate zero waste. Generate zero emissions, and I don't mean net zero, and I'm going to come back to this. We actually say in our aspirations, we want to generate zero emissions. We don't own IP. The only IP that we want to build is our cultural IP. In fact, we want to enable other companies to build IP. So a lot of the things we do is partner with groups in order for them to build IP. So they're just a few examples, but we put those into our strategy some time ago. I've been working on using these. They have been very, very powerful in actually helping us make decisions. So let me give you one example now on the emissions piece, given the topic of this conference or this webinar. We've just released our decarbonisation roadmap start of this year, but the build of that decarbonisation roadmap's actually been underway for several years. And I would say what was instrumental in the development of that decarb map was that we forced people to think about zero emissions, not net zero, The minute you go to net zero, I don't know how many times I've had people tell me we're looking at offset credits and here's our offset program, etc. And whilst that might be okay in some situations, it gives people the excuse almost to not fix the underlying issue that's creating the emissions in the first place. So actually telling our operators, frontline management teams, no, you can't use offset credits. You have actually got to eliminate emissions. That has forced people to go much deeper in the process design, their operating design, their flow sheet design, to work out what can you do to actually not create the emission in the first place. And it means you have to go very deep into the design of your business. So I do get quite frustrated sometimes when I hear organisations talking about big offset programs and credit programs. All they are doing is effectively taking an operating cost into the life of their business for the cost of offset credits in the future. So they're making their business less resilient, less flexible into the future, and they put a band-aid over their emissions program effectively. So let me give you a tangible example before I hand back to you, Sally. We're designing a new project at West Musgrave. It's a copper nickel mine, potential mine. We're looking to make a build decision in the second half of this year. The very first design we did for that had a gas pipeline coming down from the Northern Territory, building a gas-fired power plant on the mine site, and we were going to use conventional SAG and ball mills. And the mine would be designed effectively to run 24/7. And as industry convention is, you must have reliable, predictable, safe power in order to run your operations, because that's the way they're designed. And we've spent decades getting working capital out of our system. So no working capital, just in time, reliable power requirements. We've completely flipped that on its head, and through a lot of the design thinking that we did early on in the project, and this is working with many other third parties, a lot of companies outside the resource sector, in fact, to get different ideas, we have now said that we're going to build a renewable energy farm. It's about a 60 megawatt renewable energy farm, so fairly large. What that will give us, though, of course, is at times unstable, unreliable, unpredictable power. We know that that is going to be one of the consequences and challenges you have to deal with an off-grid solution like this. So we've now redesigned our processing flow sheet so it can match and work with an unreliable, unpredictable, fluctuating power supply. To do that, we have designed in vertical roller mills, and VRMs are not used in the hard rock mining sector. They're used in a few other sectors. We've done enough test work now to know that they all work. The benefit of VRMs is you can turn them off in about 5 minutes. You can turn them on in about 5 minutes. They get up to full speed. You don't lose recovery of metal, whereas SAG and ball mills usually take hours to get them wound up, get them operating properly, and you lose a lot of metal through the startup and ramp down procedure, which is one of the reasons why industry have been pushing to reliable, safe power. The benefit of doing this, though, is not just about emissions. It actually makes your operation almost free. You've almost got free power. Your operating cost for your circuit is much, much lower than the conventional SAG and ball mills. So you actually build a much more resilient operation. It can survive price cycles. It'll be one of the lowest cost operations in the world. And by the way, it is also much more lower carbon outputs. So I think the message that I'd like to impart is that you've got to make sure you're working on the right problem. And I don't think working on emissions is actually the right problem. I think you've got to go further back down your process thinking, your design thinking, and saying, what are the myriad of things that you're actually trying to create? And I think if you go far enough back down your design thinking, you can create NPV value by decarbonizing. As long as you go back far enough down your process design, then I think the West Musgraves example is a good example of that, and it shocked. I think it actually caught quite a few design engineers off guard that you can actually do this and create real value and decarbonize at the same time. And we can talk about all sorts of examples if you like later on, Sally, but that's the one I'd like to use to sort of evidence the point.
I think, Andrew, thank you for that. I think that couldn't have been a better example. It actually kind of highlights a number of things that Linda said, and I know we're going to go to Sophia in a moment, but I think what was super interesting about that is you did start with vision and mission and purpose, and really building that over time. But I love this notion of questioning the status quo and going, well, why would we be iterating from where we are to get to where we want to be? Why not rethink the whole thing and look at what that can be? Because I think sometimes when we get to the sort of the net zero or the climate change conversation, we just focus on the challenges and we don't flip the coin to the other side and go, what's the opportunity here and how could we lean into opportunity versus challenge? And opportunity actually, in addition to solving the challenges, provides opportunity, and it's good for people, planet and prosperity. So Sophia, that brings me to you and the work that you're doing at Mineral Carbonation International. Unpack that for us, because I feel like this is, there is a real thematic thing coming through here about, where we're going, the kinds of technology and things like that. So, walk us through the work that you do and what are the insights that we all need to know today?
Thank you very much, Sally Ann. And I just wanted to also acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Ngunnawal people and pay my respects to any elders, past, present and emerging, and anyone who may be on the call. And also just acknowledge that Andrew and Linda's presentations were so phenomenal, and we have a fair amount of values overlap. And I really look forward to having a really deeper discussion on some of the themes that I've learned. Like I learned the term socio-technical today, which I always use techno-economic feasibility when I talk about things, but I'm going to definitely start using socio-technical as well. So thanks for that, Linda. So I have a presentation obviously here, and it has a fair amount in it, but I'll just cover it quite quickly in the 10 minutes that I have, but acknowledging that there's a very a varied audience with us today. So a couple of the things that I might flash up on the slides might connect with somebody, and it might be a prompt that people might want to start a conversation later, either in the Q&A or on LinkedIn or whatever may happen. And so I thought I'll start with the IPCC report that just came out recently. I don't define climate change too much to people anymore. I've been working in this space for 9 years now, and at the beginning of the 9 years, I was trying to convince people that we need to do something about climate action and why that's important. But I have to say, in the past 2 years in particular, I haven't had to waste too much time convincing people, and that's been extra good because I've been able to spend my energy getting on with the actions that are needed as opposed to convincing people why it's important. However, we're working in a space called carbon capture and utilization, CCU, and a lot of the speaking I do is about telling people what it is and what the circular carbon economy is and the role it can play. And last week, the IPCC report came out with a couple of good acknowledgements and endorsements for the role that circular carbon may play in our future. And that's just acknowledging that 1.5 degrees is almost inevitable, in that we're already at 1.1 now. And so we need to be thinking about what a variety of actions that we're going to take in the future may be, and how we approach it from a risk perspective. And reducing industry emissions will be a collaborative effort across supply chains, and that carbon capture and utilization will be a part of that. Now, we know that there's going to be thousands of technologies that are going to help us to get to net zero. It's not going to be just one technology. And so I think it's important for everybody to be able to focus on the sliver of emissions that they're trying to address, but also collaborate in as many ways as possible, because at the end of the day, we are looking to avoid climate change. So there's double benefits to all of the technologies. It's not just around sustainability of business models, it's around emissions reduction. And yeah, the CCU is an important role, particularly with the hard to abate sectors, and that's where MCI is really focusing. And that in order to decarbonize, they need a mentality of circularity. So that was quite good to see CCU acknowledged in such a critical way. So MCI itself, what do we do? Well, as Sally Ann mentioned, we transform CO2 from a gas into solid materials. So we mineralize the CO2. We do that to create valuable outputs for the circular economy, which we're focusing on building materials and other valuable products at the moment, but there is a lot of applications that are possible. And we have a vision to be a world-leading provider of carbon solutions, and we would like to be locking away 1 billion tonnes of CO2 permanently and safely into products by the year 2040. I'll just acknowledge that we have around $40 million worth of R&D grant funding and investment from a number of stakeholders and shareholders, including the Australian government and Orica, who are one of our shareholders and have been a supporter, a key shareholder from day one. And who are we? We are a team of chemical engineers, process engineers, geologists, and commercialization experts. This was a photo taken around this time last year, and in just a year we've grown double the size, but we have not been able to all get together because unfortunately COVID has gotten in the way. But this is our team, mostly based in Newcastle and Canberra. Okay, CCU and CCS. I'll just quickly acknowledge that a lot of people think that carbon capture and storage is what we do, and it isn't. Carbon capture and storage is pumping CO2 underground, whereas we are trying to convert the CO2 into usable materials for use in everyday life. And so that's why we have just chosen to call ourselves CCU only. And what do we do? Basically, we take mineral feedstocks or virgin rocks that contain either magnesium or calcium components. We then process them in our pilot plant, which is just behind me here. And we process it with industrial flue gas. We can actually take really low purity CO2, so it doesn't have to be purified or anything. Low CO2 or flue gas, and we carbonate that, so combine the CO2 with the feedstock to create two main outputs, magnesium carbonate or calcium carbonate and silica. And then those two outputs we then process into products with industrial partners. So that's a quick flyby overview of what we do, chemical engineering. It's a really scalable approach to carbon utilization. There's actually, fun fact, there are enough mineral feedstocks in the world to lock away all of the CO2 that has been or will ever be released by fossil fuels. So it's not the feedstocks that limit the scalability of the technology. It's actually other things like adoption and business models. That's just a basic overview of what we do, in that we combine the feedstock and the CO2 into a carbon plant to create output materials, which is then sold to offtake partners and traders. We had some validation last year from the CSIRO that did a CO2 utilization roadmap. I highly recommend you all take a look if you're interested. That validated that we're actually able to, at scale, and not too far from our scale now, make money from abating CO2. So mostly people ask us, what sort of green premium do we require in order for our products to be competitive? We're actually looking at being able to be profitable with our green premium, and so that's why it's quite compelling. And also the roadmap also acknowledged that with proper settings, with proper policy settings and competitive settings in Australia, we'll be able to lock away 19 million tonnes of CO2 in Australia across 10 facilities. And we're well on our way, cracking on our way to get there. We had we were awarded almost $15 million from the federal government last year to scale this plant up into demonstrator. And that demonstrator will be located at Orica's Kooragang Island facility and taking CO2 from there. And working on a CCU methodology at the moment, which MCI is on the advisory, and also the National Carbon Abatement Strategy too. We won first place at the Net Zero Technology Centre COP26 pitch battle in Glasgow. That was a massive achievement for us. It was a real starting gun. It meant that a lot of our global customers that we were already working with were extra motivated to progress our global partnerships. And so there's probably going to be some big announcements in that space very shortly. And this is what what we envision our 1 million tonne plant to look like in a steel setting. So that's taking steel slags and combining with flue gas. I just thought I'd show that to the group. And thank you very much for listening. If you would like some more information, please visit our website, mineralcarbonation.com, and also feel free to link in with me. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sophia. I think that's such a great overview. And I think for a lot of people out there, you know, there was a couple of things that, you know, this whole no green premium, that actually there's this opportunity, and we've touched on it a couple of times already. There's actually a real opportunity here, not just in solving the problem, but actually an economic opportunity in terms of the output to be quite competitive. And I just think that's something that we sometimes miss in this conversation. I want to bring all four panelists to the stage, so to speak, to get into this conversation, because there's a couple of things that I've picked up and heard from you, and I'm seeing some Q&A come through, so please don't be shy, drop your questions in. I do see the one that's in there, and I will come to that in a minute. But there's a couple of things that you've all said that I want to pick up on, and I want to unpack a little bit further, because I think sometimes in this space we focus on the science and the technology to solve it, but actually each one of you has talked about collaboration and partnerships. You've either talked about co-creation with community, you know, Linda, that was a massive focus of the conversation about how critical that is. And you know, Andrew, you talked about the sort of the collaboration both with your, you know, your partners, but also inside of the organization. And Sophia, you've talked about with your partners to pull through for the products and services. What are we, I throw this to the floor and feel free to jump in, but what are we missing in this conversation, and what do we need to do to amp it up? Because I do think that that collaboration and partnership piece is a critical sort of for any deep tech industry. It's a critical pathway to pulling something through to market, but actually embedding it. But what more do we need to bring to the conversation for people to have about this? And what have we maybe not been engaging on enough?
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
A recent project that we wrote up in an international peer-reviewed journal called Energies was on looking at the impact of the carbon border adjustment mechanism in the EU, CBAM, on different colours, varieties of Australian hydrogen: brown from lignite coal, blue from gas, green from renewables. Now, it doesn't take a lot of crystal ball gazing to see that this is where we're going. But one of the things we haven't done is look at that. Do we want to be caught in Australia as laggards rather than leading? And so these markets are changing absolutely so quickly. And if you've got a 27 member state bloc like the EU, business is already starting to take this on board. So I guess role for government in positioning Australia to be able to pick up these trade opportunities that aren't what we've been doing so far. That's one thing I could think of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
I would fully agree with that. And the CBAM really does provide opportunities for Australian industries to create low carbon examples of those materials, because it does look like Japan and the USA and South Korea are all going to follow suit with something very similar. So it's our opportunity to miss. I would also acknowledge the role that government can play, and that the fact that states have really led the way thus far. Not that the government hasn't done anything, but there's a lot more that they could do. One thing that I mentioned in Glasgow when I sat on a business roundtable with the Prime Minister, and I had obviously would never usually get to meet someone who had so much power over policy, right? And one of the things that I was telling him is that we're a clean tech based in Australia, and we've been developing it for the last 15 years, and we are still, even though we've done $40 million worth of R&D, we're still not through that valley of death. And the thing is that everybody knows about the valley of death in startups, because it's, you know, where you start and then there's a dip in where your business model is not yet sustainable, but then when you come out of it, you're profitable. But in clean tech, it's been called 4 valleys of death, and then now it's called the canyon of death. And so companies are failing where they shouldn't, because they just need a little bit more collaboration or support or pull through, or, you know, there's various ways that they can be helped. But until policymakers really understand that this is the normal, this is normal in these settings, then it's very difficult.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There's, you know, the myth of Silicon Valley, that it's all self-made money, is really truly that. It's built on DARPA and energy funding. And, you know, the benefits that we see and build businesses on from the internet were not funded purely by people. It was funded, you know, by government. Andrew, I want to throw a question to you, because something that's really interesting for me. You mentioned you don't want to have lock away IP. You know, you want to kind of share this knowledge with others. How does that go with doing what you're doing, with the example that you gave about this, you know, new mine that you're starting from scratch? Really, you're rethinking the entire process, not only to have like low to no emissions, but completely restructuring the entire operations physically from an engineering perspective and a human perspective. Are you finding there's other people interested in that? And you know, how unique is that IP position and that knowledge and know-how stake that you're taking in the market? Because I feel like, you know, mining is one of these areas that we've got such a heritage in Australia, to your point earlier, but it's such the opportunity as well to kind of really quickly potentially change things. I'd love your perspective on that.
Yeah, I guess the way that we think about it is no longer is technology the barrier to taking next steps in organisations. The barriers now are cultural, by and large. They're people barriers. So there is no shortage of technology solutions to problems we've got in our businesses today. It's about the appetite and readiness for people in the organisation to actually take that step, take that personal risk, experiment. And I think that's evidence. You see it all the time now. If you want to bring a new capability set into your business, you go and hire some people, and then you bring them in and you can rapidly build new capability. So I don't think technology is a differentiator for organisations anywhere near like it used to be 20, 30 years ago, when even that recently, when people would stay in an organisation for their entire career, whereas now people move 7, 8 times, whatever the average is. So you can build capability quickly. If you believe that, trying to differentiate on technology means you need a very unique strategy to continually reinventing yourself very rapidly. And that's not our approach. And I'd say a lot of the sectors like resources, you can't really have that differentiator. So we are trying to build a culture of IP that can embrace that, as opposed to be worried about it and scared off from it. And I think it's actually solved many problems for us already. Because a lot of startups, a lot of companies that were juniors that we work with just need a bit of a leg up. They need a bit of support, a bit of traction, help get areas to experiment or test their ideas. But I think too many big organisations want to grab that IP as part of supporting them to do that. We've gone the other way and just said, you can have the IP, we'll pay for the experiments, you can use our platforms, you can use our sites. They get to experiment, they get to build capability, we get to use the technology. And I think building a culture that embraces that takes a long time and a lot of hard work. You can't replicate that overnight, whereas you can buy skills, technology off the shelf by and large today. So I think people need to rethink their business models about how they are differentiating themselves. That's our philosophy, if you like. It's not common.
No, it's not. And what I love what you said is it actually echoes back to a few of the comments about state versus federal engagement in this sector and in the conversation. And I know it's different. It's slightly different depending on where you are in the industry. But, you know, this notion in Australia, we're so competitive. I think we feel like everything, including politics, is a sport, and it really isn't. You know, the competition is actually to solve challenges and actually to lead. But this notion of how do you actually collaborate for a bigger outcome, and actually a win-win is growing the pie. It's not a fixed size of a pie, but the pie is actually able to be grown for people is really interesting. I am conscious of time, and there's a couple of questions come in, so I am just going to ask them and let whoever wants to answer. We've got a great question here from Lucas saying, would an increase in circularity, in brackets, recycle, reuse, remake metals, mean a large decline in the amount of minerals extracted, example, iron ore and bauxite in the future? So great question.
I can make a couple of comments on that, Sally.
Yeah, perfect.
So let me talk about copper, for example. So copper recycling globally is absolutely increasing, and we want to see it increasing. So it's increasing around the world. It's getting a little bit more challenging of late because there are some jurisdictions which do recycle. So China's a big recycler, and up until recently, a lot of people would send their scrap copper into China to re-smelt. Some of the geopolitical tensions have created some challenges with that. So now there are fewer destinations to scrap. But I absolutely agree that we will see greater levels of recycling in most metals. Having said that, the consumption rate is also going up rapidly. Yeah. So I seriously doubt we're going to see massive changes in demand for new metals of the various types. Notwithstanding, we will probably see greater levels of recycling. The second point is, even if you think about your day-to-day electronics that have a lot of these metals in, technology is improving, so the use of those metals is getting fewer and fewer. It gets more expensive to recover those metals from those electronics because there's so few elements or few amounts or such a little amount in each piece. So it's a real complex area. I don't think we are going to see massive changes in recycling that's going to change the need for natural extraction of resources. So we're just going to have to get much, much better at doing it efficiently, protecting the environment, protecting the planet while we do it.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point about the recycling and the fact that there is fewer and fewer things in our electronics. And I think we sometimes fail to realize that. I love, though, that whenever somebody phrases these massive challenges in recycling, I just hear massive opportunity with a really wicked problem for somebody to solve. There's another question in the chat here, directed at you, Sophia, but I'll throw it to the whole group as well, is how does the carbon price required for economic viability for your technology using flue gas capture compare with what's required for viability of direct air capture?
Great. I'm happy to answer that. Absolutely. I'll just also add one fact that I know for Andrew that he would know is that copper is infinitely recyclable, which is why it's so exciting. And also at this stage, there's more copper in everyday life than there is still left in the ground. So so coming up with really smart recycling and smarter ways of processing virgin copper is going to be more and more important as we go. And Ken's question, excellent question. The first thing that I want to say is that direct air capture is a way of sucking CO2 out of the air, out of thin air, and it's there are a lot of technologies that are getting a lot of attention and a lot of investment as a way of like reversing climate change, I think is how they couch it. Since I've been working in the field, the price for capture for a ton of CO2 that's been from direct air capture has come down from like $700 per ton, and it's, you know, getting better and better every year. And now it's down to, you know, I think $300 a ton or something like that. And so that's a CO2 supply technology, and MCI's technology is a utilization technology. So it's even if we captured all of the emissions in the world right now, even if direct air capture was at scale and capturing millions of tons from the air per day, still, what would you do with the CO2? We need long-term, safe and viable use cases for the CO2. Otherwise, you know, CCS is another option, but it's still not at scale. So MCI's technology, we actually don't rely on a carbon price at all to be viable. So the answer is zero. A carbon price adds to our sustainability of our business model. And the reason that we've designed it that way is because We got our first funding during an emissions trading scheme in a 2013 Gillard government. We had thought that our business would be economically viable with a carbon price from the beginning, but as the world has changed and we know that policy changes from location to location, we spent a lot of effort into creating very high value outputs so that we're not at the behest of different markets and carbon prices over time. So the answer is, yeah, that we're already viable without it. I hope that was okay.
I might just add a broader point.
Oh,
you
sorry.
go first. No, you go, Linda.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to contribute to what's being said and to the previous question, because a lot of this is about conservation and sustainability by design. And so, if anything, since the Dodd-Frank Act and looking at conflict minerals has been a very geopolitical exercise, and it's been one involving ethics and values around particularly cobalt and DRC. And so there's a couple of things going on here. One is to design batteries and so on that don't have cobalt, and the other is in organisations to, I guess, have decision makers who are procurers, who are going to have the knowledge to ask the right questions of their suppliers. We did a piece way back in the beginning of our project called In the Lab, and we went through the shelves in the solar lab and the battery lab saying, where do you buy your stuff? What stuff do you buy? And what is their responsibility around conflict minerals? And just one, if we flick now to today, Deakin has just installed a solar farm, and they've got a 2 megawatt utility scale battery without cobalt. So that's been a very important decision that was kind of coming out of the research. It's the first utility scale without cobalt in Australia. And if you're wondering, it's a BYD lithium ferrous phosphate battery. And so, you know, there's a whole lot of decisions that can be made at the business level, going right back to the conception of ideas. We need to be educating young researchers into using ubiquitous, cheap materials that will get us to this transition before we hit another precipice, which is just when it's too late and the world's a mess.
Andrew, did you want to add something to that?
I was going to add something to Sophia's point about carbon, because I get asked all of the time, what price do you put on carbon? How do you build that into your base NPV models? And we do put carbon price into our models. What I would say, though, is you need to look at the risk lens as well. The risk to producing carbon is all to the downside, and you can estimate and debate the downside magnitude. The risk to not producing carbon and producing clean, green products of some form is all to the upside. So you have to look at the risk elements as well as the base assumptions you're using in evaluations. And I would always back something that's more upside than downside. So it sort of becomes a no-brainer in a way.
I love it. We are so close to time. We have like 1 minute left. So this is going to be my final question to everybody on the panel. And everyone, you know, you can find our panelists, I'm sure, on LinkedIn and elsewhere and reach out to them. But what's the one sentence or one thing that you want people to take away from today? And I might start with you, Sophia.
Carbon dioxide is a resource that can be turned into valuable products, and CCU is one of the 1,000 technologies that can help us get to net zero profitably and with having a good life at the same time.
Love it. Linda, I'm going to come to you, and Andrew, I'm going to wrap with you last. Linda? Okay,
I guess I could say that involving communities in transitions is absolutely crucial to socio-technical net zero.
Yeah. Fantastic. Andrew?
Probably something I haven't said yet. I think every situation you face can either be seen as a threat or an opportunity, and it's up to you which lens you look through it. If you look through it as a threat, you will have a threat-based response, which usually is just making sure you don't fail. If you look through it as an opportunity lens, sky's the limit usually, and everything can be phrased or framed either way.
I love it. Those are wise words from all three of you. You couldn't have put it better, though. I couldn't have put it better myself, Andrew, though, because that's my lens. It's everything is two sides of the same coin. Challenge, opportunity. A couple of things I just want to share with everybody as we wrap up that I think are key takeaways that I have learned from all of you today. So this is my big thank you to the panelists. I really loved that phrase, socio-technical transitions, and I think we haven't had a chance to really unpack the depth of that, but I think we have talked about it in many ways. It's, you know, it's not just a technical transition, it's not just a policy transition, it's a behaviour transition, it's a purchasing decision, it's a mindset shift to the opportunity versus the challenge or versus the threat. And leaning into that. And I think there's been a lot to take away from that and the multifaceted transition we need to do. I think the other thing that you've all talked about and articulated is around purpose and actually setting a bigger picture or a bigger and broader agenda of what you're solving versus just one technical challenge and one product to market. And so I think that, you know, purpose gets bandied around a lot, but it actually can be a guidepost for how we make decisions. And I think the third one is that collaboration partnership piece. You know, I think we've heard this right from the start with Linda, but all the way through to Sophia, is that change doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it doesn't happen because one business leader or one company or organization chooses to do it. It happens because you actually partner and engage, whether it's with community or government or, you know, business leaders and others. And so I don't know about everybody else, but I'm feeling quite hopeful with the work that the three of you are doing and many others are doing, that there is a future that is bright and prosperous for people and planet, but also for the prosperity of Australia and more broadly globally. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our amazing panelists for your wisdom. We could talk for hours. And, you know, please check out what they're doing online and check out the amazing work, because I think it is an opportunity to lean into that. And I'll give a plug for Cicada Innovations. If you're a deep tech innovator out there and you don't know where to start with your idea and you're not sure what to do, we've got a ton of programs that are available for you free. So please connect with us, because we really need, I would like to have this conversation and be fending off 50 or 60, you know, creative individuals from Australia doing this work with building viable businesses that actually solve planetary and human problems and are profitable and sustainable for the long term. So thanks everybody. Have a great day, and, you know, contribute what you can to not just the conversation, but making the difference that we want to see in the world.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sally.